Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Bloom. I'm Vice President at Fast Business Capital, and welcome everybody to our introductory webinar on the asset-based line of credit. It's one of the most popular and effective products in addressing what is often the number one challenge for any small business owner, which is cash flow. Fixing the cash flow issues with a small business is one of the most powerful ways to position that business for continued yet manageable growth. We often see companies in a plateau where they lack adequate cash flow and can quite literally grow themselves out of business as the company is starved for cash as it scales. Ongoing access to capital via a credit line is one of the most powerful ways to solve this cash flow problem. Let's take a look at some of the industries that are good candidates for the asset-based line of credit. Generally, most kinds of business-to-business companies are going to be a potential for the credit line. This includes manufacturers, wholesalers, staffing companies, consultants, all kinds of business service providers. We can also help subcontractors and government contractors. Companies that have recurring revenue tied up in accounts receivable, any kind of business like that is generally going to be a good candidate for the asset-based line of credit. Funding needs are often the same. These companies often have a challenge in financing recurring operating expenses such as payroll, supplies, materials, inventory taxes, payroll tax, and sales tax. The credit line is designed to address these revolving needs because it itself revolves as opposed to one-time fixed expenditures, which would be a better fit with our term loan. Of course, as many of you know, companies can simultaneously have a revolving need and a fixed need, and they can get a term loan from us in combination with a credit line. Let's get right into an example of how an asset-based line of credit actually works. Imagine Tim's Manufacturing needs finance to meet payroll and buy supplies, which is a very common challenge for small businesses. He has a $100,000 in outstanding accounts receivable. We can advance Tim up to 85% of his eligible AR. Eligible means anything less than 90 days past due. This means that Tim has the flexibility to draw on any amount of money from his credit line up to $85,000. That's one of the key features of the credit line, of any credit line. It allows the borrower to be very pinpoint in how they finance their business. They only draw what they need, when they need it, rather than just maxing out the line simply because they can. Let's assume Tim draws $20,000 from his credit line to finance payroll and supplies for the next 30 days. On day one, he gets $20,000 cash deposited into his operating bank account. That reduces the availability of the line from $85,000 to $65,000. The $20,000 draw, we normally charge a servicing fee of 1% or $200. At an interest rate of 21.25%, which is equivalent to prime plus 17.99%, in 30 days, Tim would accumulate $357 in interest on that draw. We add that $357 to the $200 servicing fee for the original draw. So at day 30, the balance on the credit line would be $20,557. Now let's look at how the credit line gets paid down and revolves. We establish a lockbox to receive payments in order to secure the receivables to the credit line and to ensure the credit line gets paid down, and most importantly, so that it revolves. On day 30, Tim's customer honors the invoice and sends $50,000 in payments into the lockbox account. Out of the $50,000 payment, the balance on the credit line is reduced from $20,557 down to zero. The money remaining is $29,442, and that money is routed immediately from the lockbox account and into Tim's checking account. So if you look at Tim's checking account, you will see $29,442 on the same day that the $50,000 flowed into the lockbox account. We don't hold any money in that lockbox account in reserve. Now let's talk about how Tim's credit line revolves into the future. Remember, $50,000 flowed in at day 30, so he paid down his accounts receivable from 100,000 down to 50,000. And if we imagine that Tim bills his customers another $75,000, his new accounts receivable total is $125,000. And we can advance another 85% on that, which means his updated available credit line is now $106,250. As Tim's business grows, he's going to sell more, and that's going to translate into more accounts receivable. It also translates to higher costs associated with supporting that higher level of sales. So it's incumbent upon us to raise Tim's credit line limit so he always has access to enough cash to support the higher level of sales. We often see companies that start with a smaller credit line. They use that cash that's otherwise tied up in AR to capture a lot of new business. Their AR balances grow very quickly, so we need to raise that credit limit in order to support the higher level of sales. You want to use this as a tool for the small business to capture new accounts, capture new business, land new contracts that you otherwise wouldn't be able to land simply because the cash was locked up in the AR. With the credit line, they don't have to worry about that anymore. Now, the number one question our customers have about the asset-based line is how the lockbox actually works. Simply put, the lockbox is the mechanism we put in place to ensure that we get paid back for the funds we advance against the borrower's AR. Now, of course, businesses would never have to borrow money for everyday operating expenses if their customers paid them up front. However, many companies have to offer at least net 30 credit terms in order to land more business, retain customers, and expand their relationships with their existing customers. But it's important to know that the lockbox account is established in the name of the business at Wells Fargo. This lockbox can accept payments electronically or paper checks through the mail, as each lockbox has an associated P.O. box that can receive mailed checks. All checks and electronic payments from the borrower's customer are still made out to the borrower and not us. So the check that might be sent in the P.O. box is still written in the name of the company. The electronic deposits, the wires, and ACHs that go into the lockbox account is still made out to the borrower's company, not us. The invoices sent out to the borrower's customers are still generated in the name of the company. They don't have our name on it anywhere. Now, this is opposed to a factoring company, which would rubber stamp those invoices with their name. Finally, if the credit line is paid down in full, any incoming accounts receivable is immediately routed to the borrower's operating account. There are no float days. And in fact, this is a very common tactic in the invoice factoring business, where if the factor holds payment for additional days, they can essentially charge higher fees by moving their customer into a higher cost bucket by aging their receivables unnecessarily. Now, of course, accountability and transparency is of prime importance for our customers, which is why we provide you 24/7, on-demand, online access to the lockbox account. This is where you can see payments coming in and how the cash flows to your credit line balance, and of course, any remainder to your business's operating account. Now, since we're speaking of factoring, here's a side-by-side breakdown of some of the key differences between our asset-based line and invoice factoring. On our credit line, collection activities remain the responsibility of the borrower. When a business factors its receivables, they assign collection rights to the factor. That means the factor is collecting directly from the borrower's customers, and that can be awkward. Some companies refuse to work with a factor for that very reason. On our credit line, availability is determined by a summary AR aging report. But factoring availability is determined by the gross value of individual invoices. And this leads to a lot of cumbersome recording, handling, validating, and ultimately collecting on individual invoices. On our line, Interest only accumulates on the amount drawn. In factoring, fees are charged to the gross value of the invoices regardless of how high the advance rate is or how much the borrower actually needs. So our credit line allows borrowers to be a lot more flexible and pinpoint how it finances its operating needs. They only take what they need when they need it and are charged interest only on the portion they actually draw on for the time the account is outstanding. With the asset-based line, there is no minimum draw required. If the borrower doesn't need any capital, they literally pay nothing. There are also no additional fees or escalator rates for older AR. The difference between a credit line that's paid down in 29 days versus 31 days, for example, is 2 days of interest charged at the same rate. We also make it easy to leave or terminate the credit line. It simply needs to be paid down to zero. You tell us to close down the line of credit amount, and there is zero termination fees. Compare that to factoring. Most factors are going to charge more money for AR that's aged 61 to 90 days versus 31 to 60 days, and also charge higher fees for AR aged 31 to 60 days versus 1 to 30 days. Most factors will also require a borrower to finance all of its AR or maintain a certain minimum volume in order to maintain access to capital, even if the company doesn't have a cash flow need at that juncture. Factors are also notorious for charging very high termination fees, often tens of thousands of dollars, to get out of a contract early. It's also common for factoring companies to roll over a contract unless the borrower notifies them that they intend to leave with at least 60 days advance notice. The borrowers are often rolled into a new contract and they continue to be liable for that high termination fee. Finally, because we underwrite the entire business and look at the big picture, we can get comfortable with advancing on things that no factoring company would ever touch. Factoring companies will generally limit the underwriting to the invoices they receive and the credit worthiness of the borrower's customer. Now, because we look at the big picture, we have the ability for special advances on things like purchase orders and signed contracts. There may not be enough collateral from pure accounts receivables for a customer to capture new orders and contracts, but we will certainly consider a special advance on a purchase order or a signed contract. In factoring, they are going to strictly limit the advances to domestic commercial AR on credit risks that they feel comfortable with, and they can get very, very particular on what accounts they will ultimately advance on. Of course, small businesses can and do use merchant cash advance style financing to bridge cash flow gaps. And we view this as a far, far less favorable way to finance businesses with a cash flow situation. So let's assume that instead of using our ABL, Tim decides to finance 30 days of payroll and supplies using a $20,000 merchant cash advance. If we assume a 3% origination fee and a 1.25 buy rate or factor rate, his total cost of funds is $6,200. Also, because a cash advance by its very nature does not revolve, and he uses all this money in the first 30 days, he has access to zero lender funds at day 30. This fundamental mismatch between need and loan structure is why stacking one merchant cash advance or daily debit loan behind another is so common in our industry. Now let's compare that to using a credit line to address the same need. Tim's cost of funds on a $20,000 draw, if you remember, is $557. And because he's billing his AR, his credit line is revolving. Payments are being made on the credit line, but it's also growing because he's adding AR. Using our previous example, he has lender funds available at day 30 of $106,250. He never has to take out a cash advance in order to bridge cash flow gaps, and he'll never not have access to capital as long as he keeps building. And by using the ABL instead of a merchant cash advance or daily debit loan, Tim ultimately saves $5,500 or more in interest and fees to address the same need to maintaining access to more capital 30 days later. By using an MCA, Tim spends literally 10 times more to fund the same need and has no more cash available without renewing or taking out yet another MCA at a very high cost again. All in all, cash advances are a very, very poor way to finance the cash flow gaps of any business. That's all I have for today. If you have any questions, please send me an email or give me a call, and I'd be happy to walk through any questions I can answer for you on this product or any of our other products. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and I'll catch you later.